what the city is talking about, the news that impacts you. Welcome to the Montreal Now podcast with Aaron Rand and Natasha Hall.
Welcome to the Montreal Now podcast. I'm Aaron Rand along with Natasha Hall, and this week we take a look at these stories. The federal government, after years of being prodded by anti-gun advocates to toughen legislation, finally introduced a bill to do just that. We spoke to Federal Public Security Minister Marco Mendicino.
And we'll talk to a survivor of the Polytechnique massacre to see what she thinks of the new handgun restrictions announced by the feds this week. And it may not have come as a complete surprise when the Bank of Canada hiked interest rates this week, but the size of it caught some observers by surprise. And the announcement that more hikes are coming signals a rather aggressive stance going forward, too. We'll speak to an economist with the Conference Board of Canada. But we begin with this. Getting your first real job is a big deal, right? And at the moment, the circumstances are such that graduates have more bargaining power than ever before. What do you need to know before you accept a new gig? Here's some great advice.
ROBYN Thompson is a personal finance expert on the line right now. ROBYN, thanks for being with us.
Hello.
Can you start by saying, first of all, can we say that is in fact the case? Do you now, looking for that first job, have more of an advantage than you would have, say, 5 years ago?
Absolutely. I mean, the market has changed into a type job market. I think that if we look back, our first real jobs out of school, that takes me back a little while too. So started off originally in marketing, and when you go out for that first job, it is very intimidating because, like you said, it's how do you know what to expect and how do you know what you should get paid? And when you're looking at where we are right now, we actually looked at the job numbers for the end of March, and there was 1 million job vacancies as of the end of March in Canada. So a lot of employers are looking for skilled workers to come into the marketplace, people even that are still coming out of school that may have, co-ops or other work placements that have given them some work experience, because there is a demand for employees. So at this point, if you are, graduate from a school, you have some work experience, you have something to offer that's valuable, you have some room to negotiate here, and it's really in your favor.
I mean, that's kind of amazing and fantastic for those graduates to be in that position. But then I'm thinking, you used to kind of just have to take what you could get. Now, is it almost too many riches? Like the options are so wide that it could be incredibly intimidating?
It is, but I also think that at this point in time, there's a lot more tools that you can use from a technology perspective to your advantage to be able to understand and to assess the marketplace. The first place I would start is on some of these salary comparison tools online. There are so many.
Wow. So,
before you even start thinking about what your first job is, I recommend that you take a gut check. You step back and you understand, who am I? Especially this generation that's graduating from school and they're entering the workforce. It's very important for them to align themselves with a company that meets their values and the impact that they want to have. So whether that be environmental, like climate change or social change or inclusive culture. So the first step is to figure out, who am I and how do I want to set this foundation for the rest of my career? And then start to look for companies that align with that. That's and awesome. Then look at, so what are the different salary ranges that are offered for these types of positions across that sector, across different sectors? What are the bonus packages that are available? What's the work-life, hybrid? You guys have heard about that. Anyone who can work remotely from home, I'm not sure if you've been able to do that from the studio or not, but that's part of the world these days. So there's so many different parts to negotiate.
So my question was going to be work-life balance. We spent so much time talking about that in the middle of the pandemic, and I wonder now, is that over? That you think still part of the situation when you apply for that job? You want to know what that work-life balance is going to be.
The hybrid model is here to stay. If you can work from home remotely part-time and then go into the office, if that's part of your role. I think that some roles, especially if you're working, if it's a laborist role where you need to be physically on site, then obviously that's a different set of criteria. But for the most part, I think employers have found that, especially in this younger generation coming out of school, they're looking for positions where they have some more freedom in their life to be able to call their own shots. And if you're not an employer who's willing to offer that type of employee-employer relationship, then you're going to have a hard time finding skilled talent.
We're speaking with personal finance expert ROBYN Thompson. ROBYN, then I'm wondering, is that even more important, that quality of life and life balance? Is that more important than how much you make now? Has that shift happened?
Well, I believe that the first part, whenever you're getting into salaries or negotiations, negotiate your pay. And here, negotiate is the key word. So the worst thing that you want to do is undercut yourself from the start. Because when you start your career, this is the baseline. So if you set it too low, you'll always be trying to play catch up. So when you look at salary compensation and you look at salary compensation tools, look at the benefits package. So what is the overall compensation? I think that work-life balance sort of hybrid is a given at this point. So now it's about what else is in the detail, what devil is in that detail that you need to know. And there's 3 different areas that I tend to look at when you're talking to people about looking for work. And one of them is bonuses. So performance-related bonuses are often used to attract either new employees or to incentivize current employees to stay. So this is generally you can see it inside of the salary comparison tools or when you interview with an employer. You want to ask, what is your bonus? Is there a base bonus that you're going to receive every year? If so, how much? How often? And how is it calculated? Is it calculated based on your performance, or is it calculated based on the performance of the company overall? It's very important to understand that, because bonuses, in some cases, in my client firm, they make up half the client's salary, if not more. So they can be huge, especially if they're incentivized to perform well. The next thing to look at is the pension plan. This could go a very long way. And yes, I know, they're starting out first-time work, and already we're talking about pension plans, which seems very far off. But you have to remember that time in the market and time with money is the wealth generator. So if you could start your career and have a great pension plan, and you could have that being built for you as you go throughout your life, that means more money for you to buy a house. That means more money for you to take vacations or start a family. So look for things that aren't going to benefit you just right now, but what's going to benefit you in the long term.
I just want to tell you, though, how odd that is to hear you describing this in your first job. Talk about look at your pension. Even better, bring up the bonus idea, to which I imagine an employer would have said, you bonus? You're not even hired. What do you mean bonus? So things have changed.
They're there. It's changed, and they're there. And if you look at them, and that's why it's so important to look beyond what is the base salary, because that's the old way of looking at compensation. That is not how employers look at compensation now. It's certainly not how potential employees coming into the job market should look at it. I'm going to add another one here and say pay time off. I mean, we all work for the basics of life, but after that, we work for the things we enjoy the most. This is one of those perks where if the employer doesn't have huge pockets, pay time off is a great one that people are willing, or employers are willing to negotiate, because it gives the employee the sense of feeling that they have some more control or time over their life and isn't a huge financial drain to the company. So, it's no longer just about what's my wage and I need to get in. Start thinking about, I have talent, I have skill. There's a lot of job vacancies out here. How do I position myself? And that's really about, talking about the value you provide.
Wow. I'm taking this all in, and I'm remembering my mindset. Like when I finally landed a half decent job in my 20s, I remember my parents saying like, oh, you should think about real estate, or you should think about, savings. And I wasn't thinking about any of that, Robyn. And I regret it to this day, because if you start early, you can get a pretty decent cushion going, right? But how do you get a 20-year-old or 20-something-year-old into that mindset?
Yeah, and that's a really good question, because is that 20-year-old of today completely different from that 20-year-old of a generation ago?
Probably.
Yeah, I mean, I would say so. I mean, I don't have children that are that age, so I'm not sure. But from what I see out there in the world, and just from being above and observing people in our community, I mean, things like if you take a look at Instagram or social media, and that's where a lot of people in this sort of age tend to congregate and look and grow. I mean, the amount of information, financial information that are coming at people in this day and age is extraordinary. The amount of different investing platforms that are targeting towards younger students or people coming out of school, investment knowledge, investment literacy is significant. And I think that it's also for their parents. So people are having conversations around the dinner table about money and finances. And this is the first time that they'll have lived through a time where we've had inflation at highs, interest rates, rising, markets falling. So their parents are likely going through some financial conversations of their own. And it's a great time to teach people who are jumping into the world about how to manage this. And you're right, Natasha, as you start early, you kind of kick yourself later on, but if you don't know the questions to ask, then it's not really relevant. But if you know, then you can't unknow something. So it kind of gives you that leg up,
That's why I think we live twice. Once to go through it the first time and screw it up, and the second time to come back and do it right, knowing all this stuff we should have done but didn't do the second time right.
I hope you're right.
Of course, that's just my theory.
Hopefully we don't have to come back a third time, right?
No, hopefully not. No, that'd be fine. I have one last thing to ask, and it's kind of hypothetical, I guess. Describing all the things you're now going to know. You mentioned about analytical tools available online, about what salary should be in your particular industry. Can you reach a point where I hate to ask it this way, where you're asking for too much if it's your first job?
And this is really where do your homework. Understand when you're going in, you're going in and you're understanding what the different positions are in the field you're looking for. So understand, go through 2 or 3 different salary comparison tools, so 3 or different job search boards, and look for an equivalent position. See what they're offering. I mean, I'm not suggesting you go in and say you'd like to have a 50% bonus off the hop and you want to have a defined benefit pension plan that pays you, so much in retirement. What I'm suggesting is that you look to see what the comparables are. And then from there, understand, okay, so if this is what you're asking for, why do you deserve it? What knowledge do you bring? What skills do you bring? What did you learn in school? How can you communicate that you are one of those people that provide what employers are looking for, which are things like critical thinking? Do you have the ability to evaluate and analyze information and produce a judgment? Are you a team player? Can you work well with others and provide support to teammates? Do you have any management experience? That goes a long way. Can you effectively direct other people? How are you going to provide value to increase the bottom line of this company? And if you can provide that from an articulate perspective and say, this is what I've learned so far, this is where my knowledge is, this is why I'm a great candidate, and use storytelling as an example, so things you've actually done and how you can relate that, it's going to go a long way to give you the place where you can create and negotiate a role. And, I've had those same feelings both of you had, which is your first job, like, oh my God, somebody hired me. I have a job. Thank God, thank God it actually worked. But now you have some more control. You have more people looking for workers than you have workers able to fill these positions. And times have changed. So it's just about, using all of the tools that we have to be able to move yourself forward. And remember that, one of the most important parts here is about that savings rate. And it's about delaying the gratification of today for something in the future. And that's hard to do. But it's, delay the gratification so that you're starting this successful journey in your career and you're catapulting yourself into the future and taking all of these lessons with you. But the worst they can say is no. So ask. The worst they can say is no.
Right. I will tell you, based on your interview today, ROBYN, you're hired. Both Natasha and I agree that we're going to take you on. So well done. We'll get back to you on vacation time and bonuses soon.
You're awesome.
ROBYN Thompson, so personal finance expert with some great advice for you. ROBYN, thank you so much.
It was great to chat with you both.
Informative, interactive, and always interesting. This is Montreal Now with Aaron Rand and Natasha Hall.
The federal government announced this week that there will be a national freeze on the purchase, sale, importation, and transfer of handguns in Canada. The government is also pledging to start buying back thousands of banned assault-style weapons before the end of the year. We spoke to Public Security Minister Marco Mendicino. New gun legislation introduced yesterday by the federal government. We talked about this earlier in the show. It's pretty wide-ranging. We are joined now by Public Security Minister Marco Mendicino. Mr. Mendicino, thank you for your time this afternoon.
Hey, good afternoon.
But a bunch of questions really that need to be asked, and this is something that came up when we asked our listeners about this. People say, yes, this is a good first step, if we can call it that, but the question is, why not a complete ban?
Well, it is a big step, and, the legislation that we introduced yesterday is the most sweeping legislation that we've seen in a generation when it comes to gun reform. It is the product of many conversations and engagements with law enforcement, with people who have survived gun violence. I engaged in your hometown in Montreal there with Souvient and many others. And I think what we arrived at was a step that we could take quickly, decisively, that would have a great effect at reducing handgun violence. And that's just one of the ways in which we're going to keep our community safe. On a go forward, people won't be able to buy, sell, transfer, or import handguns, which means that the trend of that universe of firearms growing stops. And that is one important and critical step that we can take quickly.
Now, I am sure you have heard, as we did today, reaction from legal gun owners saying this new law is too wide-ranging and unfairly targets them. What do you say to those people?
Well, we respect law-abiding gun owners, and respectfully, this bill does not at all go after them. What it does do is take very seriously organized crime, and it does that, again, in some very specific ways. One, we're raising maximum sentences for those illegal traffickers at the border who are trying to get guns into Canada. Two, it gives police new powers to help interdict those gun crimes from occurring in the first place with new wiretap provisions that relate specifically to gun crime. And three, our budget this spring provides more resources for CBSA and the RCMP to build on the progress that they made last year, where they made a record number of illegal firearm seizures. That's good news, but there's still a long way to go. So we're going after organized crime. We're going after handgun violence, and we're going to work very closely with the community. And I have to say, I'm extremely grateful to Mayor Plante as well as Minister Guilbeault, both of whom have reacted very positively to this legislation.
So also reacting positively, as you mentioned, you spoke with Souvient, the organization. We spoke with Nathalie Provost earlier today. I understand you spoke with her yesterday. She is a Polytechnique survivor. They are encouraged, and as I'm sure you know, they're usually disappointed when these kinds of announcements are made. That said, Minister, she did say they still want extensive laws on automatic weapons and moves to prevent gender-based violence. So how and when might that happen?
Let me come to that, but first, I just want to tell all your listeners that I have never met a more inspirational person in my life than Nathalie Provost. And just the way in which she's expressed to me that this is her life's work is what has kept me and all of my colleagues in government going to get this legislation to where it is. And I know that they're pleased with where we're at, but I know that they're going to continue to encourage the government to go even further. So I just want to say that at the outset. But when it comes to domestic violence and gender-based violence, there was a StatsCan report that came out just last week that showed that those trends are going in the wrong direction by introducing red flag protocols, which allow people to go to court and apply to have licenses suspended and guns taken away if the individual poses a threat to anyone or themselves. We think we can get at it. There are some very good pieces of advice that we got from women's groups and other advocates around the need to protect the identity of those that come before the courts, as well as making sure that this is not a burden to survivors. That, in addition to the new mandate letter that I just issued to the RCMP Commissioner that requires that law enforcement leverage existing authorities to respond immediately to domestic violence, is another way in which we hope to make some important progress on this.
Can I ask, with respect to what you said about making sentences for people who get caught importing illegal firearms are going up? I know you went from 10 years to 14 years in some cases. The argument has been made that it's all right to have those laws, but they're not minimums. Should they be minimums?
Well, look, I would say that by raising the maximum sentence in relationship to serious gun crime, that we are sending a very powerful and clear signal that if you're in the business of trying to traffic a gun across an international border, if you're in the business of being part of a gang and you're going to use a gun to hurt or terrorize a community, then there's going to be stiffer sentences that are on the books, which will be accessible to the judge or the courts to dispense as they see fit. And when you combine that with the other measures that are in Bill C-21 that provide police with new investigatorial techniques that allows us to leverage our relationship with the United States. You know, I was in Washington, D.C. not too long ago where Secretary Mayorkas and I talked about reinvigorating the Cross-Border Crime Forum as a way to go after criminals. The message should be very clear that this is not a way to be contributing to society, and we need to also get at root causes. But that's how we're going to take on crime.
And with respect to one of the big changes here, you went, and let's face it, Bill C-21 has been in development, if you want to call it now, for quite some time. That was one of the issues that gun advocates had. Now you're going to have a mandatory program as opposed to a voluntary program. How soon till that goes into effect?
Can't be soon enough is the most honest answer, because we're 2 years into the ban of the AR-15 and assault-style rifles that have been used in mass shootings here and internationally. So I just want to acknowledge that. At the same time, it's a first ever initiative in Canada. So it's large, it's complex. What I said yesterday, what I'll say again today, is that we are going to imminently launch the first phase of this, which is a consultation with industry so that we can come up with a compensation system for those owners who bought the AR-15s and assault-style rifles when they were legal. But I want to make sure that we are beginning to buy back by the end of this year. It's not going to be easy, but we're going to get there.
All right. Natasha?
No, I'm just that's exactly what I was hoping to hear. Like, how are you going to do it? But it sounds like the wheels are in motion, and what you have to say.
Mm-hmm. They've got to move. I mean, I totally get it. And, you know, with meeting with the groups yesterday, and honestly, being able to stand shoulder to shoulder with them, that was very powerful. You know, It's not an easy thing for survivors. It's not an easy thing for anybody who has been whose lives have been forever altered by gun crime. And I have just the most profound amount of respect for them.
Public Security Minister Marco Mendicino on new federal government gun control legislation. Minister, thank you so much for your time.
No, thank you both for having me.
Asking questions, looking for answers. Here's more of Montreal Now with Aaron Rand and Natasha Hall.
Normally, when the federal government makes an announcement about new gun restrictions, advocates are disappointed. Not this time. Here's the announcement made this week, and then you'll hear how the survivor of a mass shooting feels about it.
We're introducing legislation to implement a national freeze on handgun ownership. What this means is that it will no longer be possible to buy, sell, transfer, or import handguns anywhere in Canada. In other words, we're capping the market for handguns.
That is the announcement made yesterday by Prime Minister Trudeau and Public Safety Minister Marco Mendicino, who will be joining us, by the way, at 5:20 today. And that announcement seems to have been well received by gun control advocates, which is not usually the norm, right? We're used to hearing that they're disappointed. But our next guest says this bill is the most promising legislation since the long gun registry was abolished in 2012. Let's bring on Nathalie Provost, who is a spokesperson for Police Souvient. She's also a survivor of the Polytechnique massacre. Thank you for your time today, Nathalie.
Bonjour.
Bonjour. Thank you for joining us today, Nathalie. What was your reaction to this announcement yesterday?
Oh, we were so proud. It's a real leadership we're seeing that was there in front of us in Ottawa. So it was very good news for all of us advocates for a better gun control. There were the women's group with us. There were the families of Danforth, of some others, mass shooting in Canada. So it was a great day because we were a bit. We didn't understand why there was no great leadership in Ottawa, and if you read the promises made by Mr. Trudeau since his election in 2015, we hoped there will be something strong, and now we think they're there. They are on the road, and they will work for our safety in Canada regarding gun violence.
Can I just ask, with respect to this, because there's so many elements to this bill, and I know the big one probably is this idea, as you mentioned back in 2015, it was a voluntary buyback. Now it's a mandatory buyback. Is that the biggest part of this that you're pleased with, or are there other things as well?
Oh, there's many things. The mandatory buyback was just last year in Bill C-71, if I remember correctly. No, it was C-21. Okay. And that was mandatory. That was a voluntary buyback. But now, and we knew they would go there since the last election campaign, they are creating a mandatory buyback program for assault-style weapons. But what is also a great victory for us, for gun control advocates, is that they assume fully their leadership regarding gun control for each type of gun. So they are proposing a freeze on handguns at a federal level. And for us, it's very important. We asked for that leadership, and now we see it, and the Prime Minister himself got involved in it.
Nathalie, I mentioned off the top, that this announcement has been so well received by gun control advocates like yourself, and that's not usually the norm, right? Like normally there's disappointment. I've spoken to you in the past when you felt like announcements just simply didn't go far enough. Why do you think now they are going farther? What do you think has attributed? What caused this shift?
What changed? I think that Mr. Mendicino and his team made a great job. First, we were listened at. There was real consultation, stronger consultation than what we had in 2016 and 17 and 18 with Mr. Goodale, and stronger than what has been done with Bill Blair. So we were listened at, and we felt that there was a genuine will to understand why we are requesting those strategy in a gun control bill, and for the first time in a long since the Liberal election, we have the impression that now they understand what they have to do, and they are willing to do this. The bill now is not perfect. We will request more in the next steps to have an adopted bill, but we understand that they want to work with us to improve it and to have a strong legislation for Canadians.
Is it fair to ask you if there, and as I said, it's a pretty wide-ranging bill, as you've acknowledged as well, is there more that you want to see, and if so, what is it?
First of all, we want to have a real law regarding assault-style weapons. Now we have an interdiction of a list of firearms. So we go one by one, and we say, no, this one is banned, this one is banned, this one is banned. But the market is strong, and the manufacturers know their business. So they are already creating new kinds of weapons that can be bought on the Canadian market, even if there's the ban since 2020. So we need to have a complete bill that will modify the criteria and that will make assault-style weapons totally banned on our soil in our country.
So I mentioned earlier
that and you won't see it now. Minister Mendicino promised that there will be proposition when the bill will be discussed.
So there
will be an amendment.
That's literally what I was just going to ask you. I was just going to say, given that Public Safety Minister Marco Mendicino is going to be joining us in just a couple of hours, is there anything else you would like us to say to him, Nathalie, or to ask him about?
We had the opportunity to talk with him yesterday and in the last few days. So he knows that we want an extensive law regarding assault-style weapons. And I also know, and you may understand that I haven't read it truly, all the bill that was tabled yesterday evening, but we understand that there's still work to do to protect women against gender-based violence. So we will find what can be improvable, and we will tell them in order to have a strong legislation.
And in those conversations with the minister, do you have the impression that they are ready to move forward when it comes to extensive laws on automatic weapons and protecting women against gender-based violence?
Yes. If we haven't seen the genuine will to be there, to go there, we wouldn't have been with him yesterday. It was clear for us.
You know, I'm wondering something you just said that struck me. Yeah, no, that's okay. Something you just said that struck me as interesting. This idea that of the 1,500 assault-style weapons are going to be involved in this buyback program. You're right. Manufacturers out there will just continue to make different models because they're in the business of manufacturing these. How can the government ever stop when new models come out that are not necessarily part of the original list? They're going to have to update this every month, every year. Well, what has to happen?
How about no new models? How about that?
Well, yeah, but can you stop someone from actually going ahead and doing that? I mean, because there will be some cases where they want to sell to the military and they're perfectly allowed to. So I'm wondering, Nathalie, what happens?
That's a very difficult issue,
yeah.
And we will be there to find ways. but we need to find the good criteria in order to define what is an assault-style weapon and what is acceptable and what is not. And it will be a difficult issue. We know that, but we have to go there if we want to remove this type of weapon from our streets.
Okay.
Just before we let you go, Nathalie, I'd love to know how you feel personally to see that change is really happening, that you're making a difference.
Oh, it's a strange feeling, I was involved in the very, very first days in 1990, but I was shot, and it's a long time to recover and to fully recover. It took me 15 to 20 years in order to be able to stand up and to be an advocate. I really, really worked with those of Police Souvient. Began to work with those of Police Souvient only in 2009 at the 20th anniversary. And since then, sadly, I've always been, it's always been a lot of deception. Mm-hmm. I don't know if it's an English word.
Disappointment.
Mm-hmm. So, yesterday I was really happy because we've met with Mr. Trudeau in 2014 when he was nominated chief of the Liberal Party, and we know I really believe he wants to act on gun violence, but we've never saw his leadership, and because I've seen it yesterday, I'm really happy. But we have a lot of work to do. And I will celebrate when it will be done. And Police Souvient knows that sometimes we celebrate, and sometimes years after, we are crying. And we cried a lot in 2012. And what we will do now is try to find ways that another government cannot destroy what we built.
Yes.
Wow, incredibly well said. And I think for everybody in that same sort of camp with you, this is a very, very happy day based on what we heard from the government yesterday. But you're right. It's one thing to say it. It's another thing to do it. Let's hope that follow through is there. Nathalie, Thank you so much for your time.
It's a pleasure.
The stories in the news that are worth your time. Montreal Now with Aaron Rand and Natasha Hall.
The Bank of Canada has hiked its interest rate, the benchmark rate, to 1.5% this week. But perhaps more importantly, it also made clear that rates are likely to continue to rise in an effort to bring inflation down to its 3% inflation target. We spoke to an economist at the Conference Board of Canada. PEDRO Antunes is chief economist for the Conference Board of Canada and on the line right now. PEDRO, let me start by asking, as I said, how much of a surprise we went from a quarter basis point hike to a half a point hike?
Well, I think, we've seen now two in a row, basis point hikes. This is the second one. I think the opinions were mixed as to whether it'd be a quarter or a half, but given the recent news and the additional pressures on gasoline prices, I think we were trending towards a half a basis point increase. So it didn't surprise markets that much. I think the big question mark now is, how much further will rates go? We've got 4 more announcements through the rest of this year, and how quickly will the bank raise rates? And I think the message is that they're going to continue to raise if inflation numbers continue to be as strong as they are.
Yeah, so we're dealing with inflation numbers, as we know, for a variety of reasons, post-COVID, supply constraints, et cetera. At some point, this comes to an end. I don't know if that's too optimistic of you or not, but you have to think, you have to sort of think things will eventually kind of slide back towards normal. I'm wondering how much of this telegraphing from the Bank of Canada is simply to let people know, hey, you know what, you just can't keep spending like this, and here's what we're going to do, and then hopefully people will react to that, and these increases won't have to come.
Well, that's a really good point, that inflation is the change in prices. So, I completely agree, and I think that's what we're all hoping for, that at some point, some of these price pressures that we're feeling, not only from our domestic economy, not only from within, but, globally from all of those issues you mentioned, hopefully that at some point peaks and we start to see some declines. And, things like oil prices, some raw material prices, if those things start to peak and decline, that could actually take a little bit away from inflationary pressures and help us get there. I think the bank's real concern right now is, essentially setting expectations. They don't want people to start thinking that this is going to be permanent, because that gets built into the pay, and the labor markets are, very tight right now. So, labor does have an edge here in terms of demanding higher wages. And that, I think, is the concern that the bank needs to be, that we're all worried about, essentially.
Yeah, I will point out one other thing. I think we sometimes tend to think we live in a vacuum here, right? We know we're dealing with an inflation problem here, but once you start looking around the world, you find out that other countries are having just as difficult a time with this. And I'm talking about lots of countries in Europe now, too, not just south of the border.
Well, that's right. And in fact, as varied as the economies are all over the world, when we think about developed economies through this pandemic and how we reacted and the effects post-pandemic, they're very similar. I mean, we've seen essentially a period of excesses where most developed economies went out and borrowed heavily to essentially support households and household incomes through the pandemic. So what we're living here in Canada is very similar in the U.S. and in Europe, and it's those pressures, those excesses, if you'd like, that are now starting to drive or have been driving inflationary pressures up. Tack on, some of the supply chain constraints, what's happening in China right now dealing with COVID, and of course the war in Ukraine and the massive commodity price shock that's resulted from that.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to, with respect to having lived through this before, because, we tend to look at things like this now, and yes, we've never had to deal with something like COVID for 100 years. But we're also dealing with a situation now where we haven't really had, if you want to call it, a war in Ukraine either. So some very strange, extenuating circumstances. When's the last time we went through something like this, and typically how long until we get out of it, if that's even an answerable question?
Well, I mean, there's so much uncertainty with respect to the war. Certainly our sense is that whether or not the war, hopefully the war will end soon, although there's, obviously a lot of risk around that. But even if the war ends, we feel that the sanctions will remain, or at least, the rest of the world has lost trust and will continue to move away from Russian supply chains. So that means that commodity prices will probably not get back to where they were essentially a year and a half ago. They'll come down a little bit from where they are. So I think we're going to feel the pinch of this in terms of at least higher prices and the erosion in incomes that we've had from this for a while longer. And of course, when the bank, we really haven't seen inflation like this in over 30 years. The most boring indicator the economic indicator that we've had over the last 30 years has been inflation, which ran at 2% every year for all that time. Yeah. So we're really starting to understand how devastating higher inflation is at reducing our purchasing power and really hitting hard on households.
So, Pedro, I'd like to ask a very basic question, because I think as soon as people hear about an interest rate going up, the first thing they think of is that they're going to have less money, right? So I think a lot of people struggle to comprehend how raising an interest rate is actually meant to fight inflation. Could you explain that?
Well, that's a very good point. In fact, inflation is in part eating away at those excesses on its own. But when the bank starts to try and fight inflation, well, what they're doing essentially is raising rates so that it makes it harder for households to go out and borrow. That's one effect. And also for households that are already indebted, and that's a lot of us and very highly indebted, the interest financing costs of that debt start to go up. So this is, let's not kid ourselves, this is just another hit to households so that they spend less. And if we all spend less, then that takes pressure off of the demand side of the economy and hopefully lowers inflation. So that's one of the channels that the bank is looking at. Unfortunately, interest rates are a very broad brush when you're trying to affect the economy with interest rates. You're going to have this kind of massive impact across the board on households.
Is it fair to say, and I'm not sure it is, that this is kind of this rate hike and the ones coming down the pike, that this is one way of maybe bringing housing prices down?
Well, that's another key factor. And, certainly we have seen, I think, the excesses in housing hopefully come to an end. I think it'd be, in fact, good news if we were to see some reprieve in terms of housing prices, because things were just really crazy and a little too frothy. And that was the effect of not only that support and those excesses that we talked about in terms of supporting household spending or household incomes, but also the effects of extremely low interest rates, especially through the worst of the pandemic. So in a year where there's a recession and we were expecting, households to be hard hit, housing markets to be hard hit. In fact, we saw over the last 2 years this massive ramp up in demand for real estate and prices. So, yeah, absolutely. And if we can cool the housing market, that is definitely another channel that has a cooling effect on essentially purchases of household furnishings, and that's where the inflation is right now.
I guess the last question I have, and I know this is not your sort of, center of expertise, with respect, people look at this and go, wait a sec, what about my mortgage? Now, obviously, if you're locked into a fixed mortgage, you're good for a while, at least till you have to renew. But for everybody else, there are a lot of people who now will look at this and go, okay, this is going to tack on a few $100 a month, a couple of $1,000 a year, and we're not done yet. So that's not good news for those people.
No, absolutely. That's exactly the channel, one of the channels by which higher rates impact consumption. So we have to, on aggregate, households are going to have to divert more to debt financing. That takes away from their ability to spend on other things or spend more. So absolutely, yes. And again, when we're looking at using interest rates to slow the economy, again, we can't kid ourselves. This is just another hit to households to slow the economy. Back in 1990-91, when we wanted to reduce inflation and inflation expectations, we ended up with a recession. So let's hope we can skirt that this time around, that we can get to a soft landing, that some of these global pressures will come off. But there are obviously a lot of risks right now.
Pedro, we're out of time. You want to take a wild guess as to where you think the interest rate hikes end? At what level?
I think the bank is giving us some key messages around that it's, neutral rate is somewhere between 2% and 3%. So I think, we're not quite there yet. Wow. A few more rate hikes yet to come.
Pedro Antunes at the Conference Board of Canada. Pedro, thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it. All right.
Thank you.
Not done yet. By the way, if you do the math real quick, we're only at 1.5% now. And he said they're looking at our target of getting between 2 and 3. Boo. So a lot of room still to go.
That was pretty rapid succession, wasn't it? For that's not the norm.
50
to
after
see
50.
It.
I think they said that's almost. That's only happened once before, where there are two bumps that big, one after the other. But that may not be the end of it. That's the sad part, or at least the part you have to contend with if you're dealing with mortgages and that kind of thing. So yeah. A lot of sighing. That wraps up this edition of The Week That Was here on the iHeartRadio Network. I'm Aaron Rand, along with Natasha Hall, and we will see you next week.
Have a great week.
This has been the Montreal Now podcast with Aaron Rand and Natasha Hall. Listen live on your radio weekday afternoons from 2 to 6 on CJAD 800 or through the iHeartRadio app.